English spelling is messed up, no doubt about that. For the most part, we have these three gentlemen to blame. The English language from the 5th century to about the 11th century is now referred to as Old English. It is very different from modern English. In 1066, a French guy with the fancy title of William the Conqueror, conquered England. French was to be adopted as the official language, and as a result, English from that period borrowed heavily from French at the time. But this process was not consistent, and both French and English ways of spelling were used. Although some words of French origin were respelled to suit English speech, like beef, battle, count, etc., others were not. For example, table, double, and center. Another interesting thing happened. French scribes didn't like English words that ended in S, so they substituted the S with CE, giving us words such as mice, lice, and even ice. We now come to the first gentleman. He was William Caxton. He is believed to be the first person to introduce the printing press in England in 1476. He had actually started out as a printer in Bruges, a city in present-day Belgium. And when he moved to England at the age of 54, a lot of his printing assistants moved with him to England. These assistants he employed were unfamiliar with the English language and tended to make spelling errors. Any was actually an erroneous spelling for any with an E. Busy was actually supposed to be busy with an I instead of a U. They were paid by the number of lines printed, and hence they tended to make words longer. That is how we get the current spellings of head, friend, season, shall, and many other such words. Some of these assistants were Dutch, and they tended to use Dutch spellings. The most famous influence of this is the word ghost, which was originally without the H. There was another interesting thing going on at the time. English pronunciation was changing. That period is now referred to as Great Vowel Shift. Before this period, there was only one way to pronounce each vowel, and as a result, the spellings were much more consistent. Here are some examples. The great Middle English poet Geoffrey Chaucer rhymed food, good, and blood. C and C were pronounced differently. Swear, bear, dare are pronounced differently from the word smear, although the same set of vowels is used. Another example would be a def versus leaf or sheaf. Most printers of the time used the spellings that had begun to be established, not realizing the significance of the vowel changes that were underway. By the time the vowel shifts were complete, hundreds of books had been printed that used a spelling system reflecting the pre-shift pronunciation. Now let's talk about the third guy, Samuel Johnson. Over the course of 9 years in the late 18th century, he completed the first edition of his dictionary, which he called a Dictionary of the English Language. It had about 42,000 words. That, however, pales in comparison to the dictionaries from Oxford and Merriam-Webster we use today, which have more than 10 times the number of words. So why was his work so important? Other dictionaries did exist at the time, but none matched up to the scale of Johnson's when it was published in 1755. In addition to giving etymologies and definitions, he also illustrated word usages using quotations from authors. The scope and structure of his dictionaries were followed in the later dictionaries, most notably the Webster's Dictionary and the Oxford English Dictionary. What made the endeavour more important was that he was the only scholar working on the dictionary, so it had a distinct reflection of his ideas and opinions. One particular example which stands out is his definition of the word oats. He defines the word as a grain which in England is given to horses but in Scotland supports the people. Now let's look at some of his spelling choices. His idea was to base his spellings on the origin of the word, but he wasn't always correct, and in many cases he wrongly thought that some words were derived from Greek or Latin. That's how we get the spellings for ache, dead, doubt, and scissors. Some of his other choices were also inconsistent. While retaining the Latin P in receipt, he left it out of deceit. He spelled Dane one way and disdain another. Let's talk about the third gentleman now. He was Noah Webster, and he's the reason the notion of American English exists today. Before he published his eponymous dictionary in 1828, there wasn't really a concept of American English. Webster himself saw the dictionaries as a nationalizing device to separate America from Britain. We're all too familiar with the differences between the American English spellings and the British English spellings. The core idea was that Webster wanted to make English spelling simpler. He wanted to reform the English spelling. So there you have it, guys. That's the story of how these three guys have changed English spelling forever. A lot of people in organizations have tried to change things and have advocated for simpler spellings, but most such efforts haven't really been successful. We'll talk more about these in our next video. Do subscribe and like the video to learn more about the English language. Thank you.